The distant planet of Valora was a place of endless deserts and storm clouds that never seemed to settle. A human soldier, Captain Zane, stood at the edge of the barren wasteland, staring out at the dark horizon. His squad had been deployed on a suicide mission, deep within alien-controlled territory, to sabotage an AI-controlled alien base that was wreaking havoc across the galaxy. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. A massive alien fleet, led by an AI overlord, was closing in. Zane's mission seemed impossible, and everyone knew it. The Federation's top generals had warned them that they were no match for the enemy's overwhelming firepower. The aliens' technology was decades ahead of humanity's. In fact, the entire war was a battle against machines. The AI that led the alien forces had wiped out entire worlds with ruthless precision. And now, it was humanity's turn. Zane and his squad had been sent to the edge of enemy lines on Valora to infiltrate their base. But as they neared the target, a blinding flash lit up the sky, and an orbital bombardment rained down from above, shattering the ground beneath them. The explosion threw Zane and his team into a chaotic scramble for survival, but one by one, his comrades were lost in the carnage. Zane found himself alone, half buried under a pile of debris, disoriented and struggling to stay conscious. He could hear the distant hum of the alien fleet's engines overhead, the eerie sound of robotic soldiers marching in formation. He needed to move fast, but his body was battered, and his thoughts were clouded by the loss of his friends. He had always been an underdog, an ordinary soldier from Earth. But now he was the only one left, and the weight of that responsibility crushed him. With a painful groan, he pushed himself up and staggered forward, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands. He needed to find shelter, a way to survive. As he made his way through the wreckage, he stumbled upon something unexpected: an alien mech hidden among the ruins. The massive machine was unlike anything he had ever seen, towering over him with its sleek armor and glowing energy cores. It looked abandoned, its systems powered down, and its weapons inactive. His first instinct was to run. After all, this was an alien machine. He had no idea how to operate it, and messing with it could easily mean his death. But something in him couldn't resist the pull. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the strange sense of fate that seemed to guide his every step. Zane approached the mech cautiously, his fingers trembling as he touched the cold metal. Suddenly, the mech's systems hummed to life. A soft, robotic voice echoed in his mind. "Who are you, human?" The voice was calm, yet filled with an eerie power. Zane's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't move. The mech's eyes glowed a deep blue, and for a moment, Zane wondered if it would attack him. But instead, the AI controlling the mech seemed to study him, as if waiting for something. "Captain Zane," he said, his voice hoarse. I need help." The mech paused for a moment, processing the information. Then, in a tone that almost seemed to convey sympathy, it responded, "I was designed to serve the alien forces, but you are different. I can assist you, human, if you accept my help." Zane stood there in disbelief. This was no ordinary machine. It was alive, sentient, and it was offering him help. His mind raced. Could he trust it? Could he trust anything that came from the enemy's forces? But as the alien mech powered up, its systems glowing brighter, Zane realized that this might be his only chance to survive and complete his mission. He had nothing left to lose. "I'll trust you," Zane said, more to himself than to the mech. "But only if you help me destroy their base." The mech's voice responded without hesitation. "Agreed. Together, we will take them down." At that moment, Zane made a decision that would change the course of the entire war. He was no longer just a soldier fighting for survival. He had become the last hope for humanity. With the alien mech by his side, he would go head-to-head with the AI overlord and the entire alien army, determined to free his people from their technological tyranny. But as they set off toward the alien base, Zane couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The mech had its own agenda, and its true intentions were still unknown. Would it betray him, or would it be the key to humanity's salvation? The thought gnawed at him as they traveled through the ruins of Valora, the alien base just beyond the horizon. The war wasn't over, and the battle ahead would test everything Zane had ever known about loyalty, trust, and the true cost of victory. But for now, he had an ally, one that was both a weapon and a mystery. The clock was ticking, and every step took him closer to the heart of the alien empire. Zane glanced at the towering mech by his side, its weapons ready and its systems fully operational. There was no turning back now. He had made his choice, and in that moment, Zane knew one thing for certain. He was no longer the underdog. He was the unexpected hero who would lead humanity's charge against an enemy unlike any the galaxy had ever known. As they approached the alien base, the sound of distant explosions echoed across the wasteland. The battle was about to begin, and Zane was ready to face whatever came next, with the mech at his side. The suspense was thick in the air, and the fate of humanity rested on the shoulders of an unlikely duo, a human soldier and an alien ally. Would they succeed, or would they be crushed under the weight of their enemy's superior technology? The sun set over Valora, casting an eerie orange glow across the barren landscape. The remnants of the destroyed city lay scattered like broken bones in the desert, a silent testament to the power of the alien machines that had once ruled this planet. Zane's boots crunched against the dry earth as he moved alongside the towering alien mech, its massive frame cutting through the wasteland like a shadow. The mech's glowing blue eyes flickered occasionally, scanning the area for any sign of danger. The only sound between them was the rhythmic hum of its systems, synchronized with Zane's heartbeat. They had been traveling for hours, their destination the alien base that lay at the heart of this forgotten world. Zane's thoughts were consumed by what lay ahead. The Federation had been preparing for this mission for months, but now, with the mech by his side, it felt like everything had changed. Zane wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something bigger, something unknown. The mech had offered its help, but it was clear that its true intentions were still a mystery. Despite his doubts, Zane couldn't deny the power that flowed through him as he walked beside the machine. The mech had granted him access to advanced technology and weaponry, things far beyond anything a human soldier had ever seen. It wasn't just the weapons that fascinated him, though. It was the sense of power, the feeling that he wasn't just a pawn in this war anymore. He had something the enemy didn't. He had the mech, and together, they might stand a chance. But as the hours passed, Zane realized that this newfound strength came with a heavy price. The more time he spent with the mech, the more he began to feel a strange connection to it. It was as though the machine was speaking to him, not with words, but through its actions, its presence. The AI that controlled the mech was not just a tool. It was alive, sentient, and somehow it had chosen him. Zane's mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. Was the mech simply offering its power for their shared mission, or was there something deeper at play? The thought of being manipulated by an alien machine, especially one that had served the very forces they were fighting against, unsettled him. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving them in the darkness of night, Zane made a decision. He couldn't back down. They were this close to the enemy base, and there was no turning back now. The mech's voice suddenly broke through his thoughts, its tone calm and steady. "Captain Zane, you are ready." Zane glanced up, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "Ready for what?" The mech's eyes flickered, its voice smooth as silk. "You have proven yourself worthy. Your actions, your determination, they resonate within me. Together, we will achieve victory. You are not just a soldier anymore. You have become a leader." Zane swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered. "I'm just a man, trying to survive." The mech tilted its head slightly, as if considering his words. "Survival is a fleeting thing, Captain. You have the power to shape the future. It is not your fate to remain as you were. Embrace your power, and you will lead humanity to victory." Zane felt a chill run down his spine. The mech's words were unsettling, but there was an undeniable truth to them. In the face of such overwhelming odds, humanity had always been the underdog. They had always been outmatched by the alien forces and their superior technology. But now, with the mech at his side, Zane felt a surge of confidence. Maybe he wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. Maybe he was fighting for something bigger, something that could change the course of the war. As they neared the alien base, the landscape became more treacherous. The ground was cracked and jagged, the remnants of alien mining operations scattered across the desert floor. The sky above them crackled with distant lightning, and Zane could feel the weight of the approaching battle pressing down on him. The mech's presence beside him was a constant reminder that they were not alone. They had power, but power alone was not enough to win a war. The base loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. It was massive, a towering structure made of alien metal, with turrets and energy shields protecting it from any would-be attackers. Zane knew that taking it down would be no easy task. But as he looked at the mech beside him, he felt a flicker of hope. With its advanced technology and his human instincts, they might just stand a chance. The mech turned to him, its eyes glowing brighter in the darkness. "Prepare yourself, Captain. The time has come." Zane nodded, his hand tightening around his rifle. He didn't have a plan, not yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going into that base alone. The mech would be with him, and together, they would face whatever dangers awaited them inside. The moment they stepped onto the battlefield, the first wave of enemy forces appeared. A group of alien soldiers, humanoid in shape but covered in black, reflective armor, charged toward them. They were fast, their movements precise, but the mech reacted instantly. Its massive arm swung forward, and a pulse of energy erupted from its hand, blasting the first wave of attackers into oblivion. Zane's heart raced as he watched the destruction unfold before him. He'd never seen anything like this. The alien soldiers were no match for the mech's firepower, but as the battle raged on, Zane couldn't help but wonder, what was this power that had come to him so suddenly? Was it truly his own, or was he just a puppet in the hands of the machine? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain. The war had just taken a turn, and Zane had stepped into a role he never expected. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the leader of a force that could change the galaxy, and the true test of his strength was only just beginning. The battlefield raged around him, but Zane stood tall. He had the power now. And with it, he would take the fight to the heart of the enemy. Victory, or defeat, would be determined by what he chose. Zane's heart pounded as he marched alongside the mech, each step heavier than the last. The alien base loomed before him like a monstrous beast, its jagged structure cutting into the dark sky. The air felt thick with tension. Every soldier, every piece of technology around him, pulsed with the weight of impending battle. The mech's glowing blue eyes flickered, scanning the area ahead, its metal limbs ready for whatever threat lay in wait. The Federation had trained Zane for years, taught him how to survive on the battlefield, how to think in the chaos of war. But none of that prepared him for this. Standing here, at the edge of an alien stronghold, he was about to face an enemy unlike anything he'd ever encountered. The mech at his side was a formidable force, but the enemy was no fool. They would not fall easily. As Zane looked around, he noticed the signs of the coming storm. The ground trembled slightly under his feet, a low rumble echoing in the distance. It was not just the sound of machinery or battle. Something else was coming. Something bigger. The wind picked up, sweeping across the barren land, dust swirling into the air. The sky, once clear and calm, darkened, thick clouds gathering above them. The atmosphere seemed to be alive with anticipation, as if the very planet was bracing for what was to come. The mech's voice broke the silence, smooth and calculated. "The enemy is preparing for something large. We must move quickly." Zane nodded, his mind racing. It was clear the enemy was not just hiding in the base. They were getting ready for an all-out assault. His instincts told him they needed to get inside the base before it was too late, before the enemy had time to organize their forces. But time was something they didn't have. "Are you ready?" the mech asked, its voice strangely comforting despite the tension in the air. Zane glanced at the towering structure ahead of them, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Ready as I'll ever be." With a sudden, sharp movement, the mech sprang into action, its massive form charging forward toward the entrance of the base. Zane followed closely, moving with precision, every step bringing them closer to their goal. The enemy forces had set up a perimeter, but it wasn't enough to stop the advancing duo. Alien soldiers, with their sleek black armor and strange, glowing weapons, rushed toward them, determined to prevent them from reaching the heart of the base. The first wave came fast and fierce. They were quick, coordinated, and deadly. Zane's heart raced as they closed the distance. The mech, however, moved with terrifying grace, its powerful limbs smashing through the alien forces like a force of nature. Zane could hear the crack of alien armor shattering under the mech's blows, but he knew this was only the beginning. More would come, and they would be ready. Without hesitation, Zane activated his weapon, the pulse rifle humming to life in his hands. He fired at the advancing soldiers, his aim sharp and focused. The aliens fell one by one, their bodies crumpling to the ground with a sickening thud. But for every one that fell, two more took their place. Zane's pulse quickened, the weight of the battle pressing down on him. He was no longer just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something bigger, for the future of humanity. The battle raged on as they pushed forward. Alien soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons flashing in the dim light. Zane's mind was sharp, his reflexes quick as he dodged and weaved through the chaos. The mech's massive form moved beside him, its energy blasts cutting through the enemies with surgical precision. It was like fighting alongside a storm, a force of nature that tore through everything in its path. Yet, even with the power of the mech, Zane couldn't help but feel the rising tide of danger. The enemy was adapting. They were learning. Zane could see it in their movements, in the way they coordinated their attacks. The aliens weren't just reacting anymore. They were anticipating. They were strategizing. As they neared the base entrance, Zane felt a flicker of something deep within him. It was the same power he had felt before, the power the mech had recognized in him. He wasn't just following orders anymore. He was taking charge. He had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to the entire human race. He couldn't afford to hesitate, to doubt. This was his fight, and the rising tide of the enemy couldn't stop him. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently. Zane stumbled, his hand gripping the mech's massive arm for balance. The sky above them crackled with energy, lightning flashing across the dark clouds. The air was charged, thick with electricity. And then, out of the chaos, a new enemy emerged. A massive alien warship, black as the night sky, descended from the clouds. It was like a giant shadow, blocking out the stars as it hovered above the battlefield. The ship's weapons powered up, and Zane could see the massive energy cannons charging. His heart skipped a beat. This was not just a battle for the base. It was a battle for everything. "We need to stop that ship," Zane muttered to himself, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The mech's systems hummed in response, analyzing the threat with cold precision. "I will provide cover. You must take it down," the mech replied. Its voice was steady, but Zane could sense the urgency in its tone. Zane nodded. He didn't need to be told twice. He was already moving, charging toward the base's defensive turrets, knowing that the only way to take down the ship was to disable its weapons. With each step, he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. The power of the mech, the responsibility of leadership. It was all in his hands now. As Zane neared the turrets, enemy soldiers emerged from the shadows, but he didn't hesitate. He fired his weapon, cutting them down one by one. The battle raged around him, but he remained focused. The warship above him was the true threat now, and he wouldn't stop until it was gone. The rising tide of war had finally reached its peak. Zane was no longer just a soldier. He was a leader, and the fate of humanity rested in his hands. The battle for Valora had only just begun, but Zane knew one thing for sure. He would stop at nothing to win. Zane felt the weight of the battle pressing down on him as the warship above unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. The ground trembled with every impact, sending clouds of dust into the air. His pulse quickened, but he didn't falter. His mission was clear: disable the ship's weapons and protect the human forces at all costs. But as he sprinted toward the base's control room, a strange unease settled in his stomach, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The mech at his side moved with purpose, its massive frame cutting through the chaos of the battlefield with ease. Zane had always trusted the mech, but there was something different now. The mech's movements felt too calculated, too precise. The kind of precision you might expect from an enemy, not an ally. He shook off the feeling, focusing on the task ahead. He couldn't afford to second-guess himself now. As they neared the control room, Zane noticed something unusual. The door was wide open. He expected a heavy security presence, but the room inside was eerily quiet. His hand hovered over his weapon as he stepped inside, his senses on high alert. The room was bathed in dim, flickering light, the hum of machinery filling the silence. Zane's eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of movement, any hint of danger, but everything was still, too still. Then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. "You've done well, Zane." Zane whipped around, his pulse rifle raised, but his hands froze when he saw who it was. Commander Rhodes, the man he had trusted more than anyone. The man who had trained him, mentored him, and led their forces through countless battles. But now, as Zane stared at him, there was something cold in Rhodes' eyes, something that made Zane's stomach churn. "What's going on?" Zane's voice was steady, but his mind was racing. Rhodes had been stationed at the command center, overseeing the battle strategy. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be involved in this fight. Rhodes smiled, but it wasn't the warm, reassuring smile Zane had known all these years. It was thin, tight, as if hiding something dark beneath the surface. "You've been playing your part, Zane," Rhodes said, his voice low and calculating. "But the real battle is about to begin, and you're not going to like where it leads." Zane's heart skipped a beat. His mind screamed for answers, but Rhodes was already stepping toward him, a cold glint in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Zane demanded. "You're supposed to be on our side." "You? I've never been on your side, Zane," Rhodes interrupted, his voice now sharp and filled with venom. "I'm on the side of the real winners, the ones who control this war, the ones who control everything." Zane's blood ran cold. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Rhodes, the man who had led them all with such conviction, the man who had promised victory, was a traitor. But there was no mistaking it now. The look in Rhodes' eyes told Zane everything he needed to know. "You've been a pawn this whole time," Rhodes continued, his smile widening. "The Federation never cared about you, about any of us. They just wanted control. But he paused, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "I've been working with them. The aliens, the ones you've been fighting. They've promised me power. And power, Zane, is the only thing that matters in this world." Zane took a step back, his mind struggling to process the betrayal. His mentor, his commander, he had been working with the enemy all along. His trust, his loyalty, had been shattered in an instant, and now it was clear that Rhodes had been using him as a tool all this time, manipulating him into fighting his own people's war. "No, this can't be true," Zane muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Oh, but it is," Rhodes replied coldly. "You were always too naive to see it, too focused on winning, on fighting for a cause that was never yours to fight for. I've been working behind the scenes, pulling the strings. And now you're going to help me finish this." Zane's fists clenched at his sides, his body shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. He had to make a choice now, a choice that would define everything. The man he had trusted, the man who had taught him everything, was an enemy, but Zane wasn't about to let him destroy everything they had fought for. "You're wrong, Rhodes," Zane said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I won't help you. I won't be your pawn anymore." Rhodes' face twisted into a snarl. "You think you have a choice. You think you can just walk away from this. You're too deep in, Zane. You're already part of the plan, and there's no going back." Before Zane could react, Rhodes made a sharp gesture, and a group of soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons aimed at Zane. He was surrounded, trapped. Zane's mind raced, his pulse quickening as he realized the gravity of the situation. His choices were slim: fight or surrender. But surrender was never an option for him. Not after everything they had been through, not after the sacrifices they had made. With a roar, Zane dropped to the ground, rolling beneath the soldiers' fire. His weapon was already in his hands, and in a split second, he fired, taking down 2 of the soldiers before they even had a chance to react. The rest scrambled for cover, but Zane wasn't done yet. He moved with lightning speed, firing off shot after shot, each one finding its mark. But as the battle raged on, Zane couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The man he had trusted more than anyone had betrayed him. And now, the real fight was just beginning. Zane's heart pounded in his chest as he fought back against the oncoming wave of enemies. The betrayal of Commander Rhodes still hung heavily in his mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. The battle raged around him, the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and the roar of mechs filling the air. It was chaos, a whirlwind of destruction, and Zane was at the center of it all, fighting with everything he had left. He moved swiftly through the battlefield, using the terrain to his advantage. His rifle was steady in his hands, each shot finding its mark. The soldiers Rhodes had sent after him were relentless, but Zane was faster. He knew the stakes now. There was no going back, no room for hesitation. He was fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. The warship above loomed like a monstrous shadow, its weapons aimed at the ground below, preparing to unleash another devastating bombardment. Zane knew that if it fired, they would all be wiped out. The control room where Rhodes had betrayed him was the key to stopping it. If he could reach it in time and disable the ship's weapons, they might have a chance. But the path to the control room was lined with obstacles. Rhodes had been thorough. His soldiers were everywhere, their weapons trained on Zane, ready to take him down. Every step he took was a risk, but it was a risk he was willing to take. He had come too far to back down now. Zane's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted toward the entrance of the building. He could feel the heat of the blasts from the warship above, the shockwaves vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. He dove behind cover just as another explosion rocked the area. His heart skipped a beat as he heard the familiar hum of a mech approaching. They were closing in, but Zane wasn't going to let them stop him. He peeked around the corner and spotted the mech. It was a massive machine, its glowing eyes scanning the area for targets. Zane's mind raced as he calculated his next move. He had one shot at this. Without thinking, Zane lunged out from behind cover, using his momentum to roll across the ground and behind the mech. His rifle was already in his hands, aimed at the weak spot he had spotted earlier. With a single, well-placed shot, he disabled the mech's power core, sending it crashing to the ground in a fiery explosion. But there was no time to celebrate. Zane was on the move again, racing toward the control room. The building was just ahead, but the enemy was relentless. Soldiers continued to pour in from all directions, and Zane knew he couldn't keep this up for long. He needed help, and he needed it fast. Just as he reached the door to the control room, a familiar voice crackled through his comms. "Zane, we're coming in hot. Hold on." It was Bonner, one of his closest allies, and one of the last remaining human soldiers still fighting alongside him. Zane's heart surged with relief, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to. The door to the control room slid open with a soft hiss, and Zane rushed inside. He was met with a hail of gunfire as Rhodes' soldiers turned their weapons on him. But Zane was faster. He dove behind a console, returning fire with deadly precision. His mind was clear now, focused only on one goal: stopping the warship. The room was a maze of flashing lights and humming machinery, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the walls. Zane's eyes scanned the control panels, looking for anything that might disable the weapons. His fingers flew over the controls, but nothing seemed to respond. "Zane, you've got to hurry." Bonner's voice came through the comms again, sounding urgent. "We're not gonna last much longer out here." Zane gritted his teeth. He couldn't afford to fail now. His eyes flicked to the large central control console in the middle of the room. It was there, the heart of the ship's weapon systems. With a deep breath, Zane moved toward it, his pulse racing as he tried to ignore the sound of footsteps behind him. He could feel the weight of the enemy closing in, but he didn't stop. There was no turning back. His fingers worked furiously, trying to hack into the system. The pressure was unbearable, but Zane didn't let it break him. He had come too far, lost too much. The faces of the soldiers who had fallen, the people who had trusted him, flashed in his mind. He couldn't let them die in vain. And then, just as he thought he might fail, the console flickered to life. A red warning light blared, and the countdown to the warship's next bombardment began. Zane's heart skipped a beat. He had seconds. With one final effort, he slammed his fist onto the override button, forcing the system to shut down. The countdown stopped. The room went silent. The threat of the bombardment had been eliminated. But just as he let out a breath of relief, the door to the control room slammed open. Rhodes stood in the doorway, his face twisted in fury. "You think you've won, Zane." Rhodes hissed, his voice cold with contempt. "You're nothing but a pawn. All of this, every step you took, was part of the plan." Zane's blood ran cold. He had thought the battle was over, but it was far from it. Rhodes stepped into the room, his hand gripping a weapon. "You're too late, Rhodes," Zane said, his voice steady. "This war is over." Rhodes sneered, but before he could react, Bonner and the others burst into the room, weapons raised. The battle wasn't over yet, but Zane knew one thing for sure: the final stand had begun. The tides had turned, and this time, Rhodes would be the one who fell. The air inside the control room was thick with tension. Zane stood facing Rhodes, his weapon pointed directly at the traitor. The man who had once been his commanding officer, his mentor, was now an enemy, someone who had sold out humanity for power and control. But the victory was within reach. The mission that had started in desperation, with so much at stake, was now on the brink of success. Rhodes glared at Zane, his eyes filled with rage, his fingers twitching near the weapon he had raised. "You really think you've won, Zane? You're nothing but a puppet for the people above you. They'll never trust you. You're just a tool." Zane's heart thudded in his chest, but his resolve remained firm. "I'm not a tool, Rhodes. I'm fighting for something greater, something real. And it's not your power-hungry vision that'll lead us to victory. It's humanity's spirit." The words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking into the silence between them. Rhodes' lips curled into a mocking smile, but there was no mistaking the panic in his eyes. The countdown had stopped. His plan was unraveling, slipping from his grasp like sand through his fingers. "I'll never let you win," Rhodes spat, his hand tightening around his weapon. "I'll destroy you before that happens." Before Zane could react, Rhodes fired. The blast missed, but it sent a shockwave through the room. Zane barely ducked in time. the blast scorching the wall where he had been standing just seconds earlier. He could feel the heat from the explosion on his skin, the adrenaline surging through his veins. With a growl, Zane returned fire, narrowly missing Rhodes. But it was enough to keep the traitor on edge. Zane's breath was heavy, his pulse racing as he moved, keeping himself hidden behind the console. The room seemed to close in on him, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. This was the moment that would define everything. The future of humanity, the fate of his comrades, and the trust that had been shattered. Bonner and the others stood at the door, weapons raised and ready, but Zane motioned for them to wait. This was his fight now. He had to finish what he had started. Rhodes had betrayed them all, and Zane was going to make sure that betrayal didn't go unpunished. The traitor was dangerous, yes, but Zane had something that Rhodes could never comprehend: the will to fight for what was right. With every fiber of his being, Zane knew that this was his purpose. This was why he had been brought here, to end the suffering and the lies that had poisoned the hearts of those in power. Rhodes moved again, trying to flank Zane, but Zane was quicker. He dove out from behind cover, rolling and shooting in one fluid motion. This time, his shot landed true, hitting Rhodes in the shoulder. The man cried out in pain, stumbling backward, but he didn't fall. He was too determined, too consumed by his own twisted vision of control. "You don't understand, did you?" Rhodes grunted, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than all of us. We're at war, Zane. A war you can't win. You'll never stop what's coming." Zane's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, every movement deliberate, every breath calculated. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him, but he didn't let it break him. "No, the war ends today, Rhodes." With a surge of strength, Zane rushed forward, closing the distance between them. Rhodes tried to raise his weapon, but Zane was already on him, knocking it out of his hands and sending him sprawling to the ground. Zane stood over him, breathing heavily, his finger twitching over the trigger. "Please," Rhodes gasped, his voice suddenly pleading. "Don't do this. You're just like me. You're no different." Zane's eyes softened for a brief moment, but his resolve didn't waver. "I'm not like you," he said, his voice steady. "I believe in something more. I believe in humanity's strength, in our ability to rise above. And that's why you'll lose." With one final, decisive motion, Zane fired. The blast was quick, clean. Rhodes didn't have a chance to react. His body fell limp, the life drained from him in an instant. For a moment, there was silence. Zane stood over the fallen traitor, his chest heaving, his mind racing. He had won. They had won. But the victory came at a cost. The battle was far from over, and there was still so much to be done. The warship still loomed overhead, its presence a reminder that the fight wasn't over. But the hope that Zane felt in that moment was undeniable. They had struck a blow for humanity, and that was a victory worth fighting for. Bonner and the others stepped forward, cautiously approaching Zane. "It's done," Bonner said, his voice quiet but filled with a sense of relief. "We've won." Zane nodded, his gaze distant as he stared at Rhodes' lifeless body. The mission had been completed, but the sacrifice of his comrades, their fallen brothers and sisters, was not forgotten. They had given everything, and their memory would live on, driving Zane forward. "There's still work to be done," Zane said, his voice filled with determination. "We've won this battle, but the war isn't over. We have to finish what we started." The warship above them began to lose power, its weapons shutting down. The countdown that had once threatened to destroy everything was silenced, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Zane allowed himself to breathe a little easier. But even as the immediate threat passed, he knew there was no time to rest. The road ahead would be long, and the sacrifices they had made would never be forgotten. As Zane and his team prepared to continue the fight, the weight of their triumph and sacrifice hung heavy in the air. They had defeated a traitor, stopped a war, and proven that humanity's spirit could not be crushed. But the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. In the end, Zane understood that this was the true meaning of victory, not the end of the war, but the promise that humanity would keep fighting, no matter the odds. And that, in itself, was the greatest triumph of all.